I'll go into some, and then I'll go into some specific things. Everything from making sure that we have goals, that we understand our audience, who we're targeting, that we are consistently creating content, and that we're doing all these things at the right schedule. And it's important, even the smallest detail as to like what time of day and what day of the week that you send an email has a big impact on the results that you get on that specific email. So going on to the next slide. See, here we're seeing 3 icons, right? And the first one is about engagement. So one of the things that we can set goals on engagement, specifically around open rates, click-through rates, or enrollment rates, or signups, right? Like those are the things that we measure. So it's really good to have those goals because it gets you trying different ways to increase that engagement. Also, when it comes to education and data, is that what are we sharing, right? What key information are we sharing with our groups that is relevant, that is new, and that is different? And then the last part is about taking action. So getting our followers or getting our subscribers to take action, like signing a petition, RSVPing to an event, whether it's in person or online, right? Some of these things are really important. And it's key that you set goals. It's key that you set goals so that you're constantly finding ways to improve and making that better. Next slide, please. So one of the key things that I'm always going to talk about is, and that I always tell people, is that you need to know your audience. You know, you can ask yourself, who are you speaking to? What do they want to hear? What motivates them? Are they super volunteers? Are they new? Do they ever even open your emails? Has it been months since they took any action? These are really important questions that you need to ask yourself before you send an email. So if you're always sending emails to your entire list, you're not doing it right. I'm going to repeat that. If you are always sending emails to your entire list, you are not doing it right. You should be able to tag and make different lists of folks, whether it's your group of super volunteers, whether it's the folks that have taken action or gone to an event or participated in an event, in the last 3 months, or whether it's someone that subscribed that never participated, or maybe it's folks that donated, right? Depending on your group and what you want them to do. It's really, really important that you are targeting your emails correctly. For example, you shouldn't be sending general emails to someone who doesn't ever participate in any of your events, right? Maybe you only send them specific things and specific asks that might be more relevant to them, which can eventually increase engagement. So email is basically a constant test that you are trying to figure out or trying to learn from your audience to see how they respond. So those are things that you need to think about, is that every single email, you should be considering it a test and trying to learn, like figuring out with your goals what you're trying to learn from that email. And that you're always changing your audience so that you have a very purposeful approach when you're gathering this data. And the one thing that is also really, really important and that we need to keep in mind is how your email or your message or your content, how is it fitting into any DEI related content or DEI goals for your organization? This is one of the key things that I really focused on when I joined EMB Action and EMB Law a few years ago and led their marketing communications team, is that it was always white techies who showed up to things. And it was white techies who responded to emails. And we worked really hard on that message to include other folks. And over time, we saw that with the narrative change, we saw our organization diversify. So that's why it's really important that you pay attention to that. Other things like, what stories do I want to amplify? Questions like, do I have accessible content for people with disabilities? Are you talking about issues that affect marginalized groups, right? So are we talking about white people problems? Are we talking about marginalized groups problems, low income problems, right? How are we bringing in more people? So it's always good to consider those things. Next slide, please. So going into knowing your audience, right? I'm talking about batch content and creation for newsletters. So one of the things that I really see when I get newsletters a lot of the time and I'm one of those people that has stopped reading newsletters. I go for like the ask, right? Like, what is it that you asking me? What do you need from me? And a lot of people have gotten that way over time. Um, Newsletters have become very specific, and newsletters have become very specific to the super volunteers or the super engaged who really want to be in the know and have the time to be in the know. So, by the way, we're going to have a moment for questions, so we'll get there. So it's really, really important that the content that goes into your newsletters, that it's relevant to the people you're sending it to. Again, I did say, if you're sending your emails to everyone all the time, you're not doing it right. So some of the things that you should consider is creating your content pillars. So I'll give you an example. At EMB Action, our content pillars were about the environment, we're about equity, and we're about economics, because our subscribers and our followers really cared about those different issues. Different groups prioritize those issues differently. So we made sure to always have content for those three things. We also set Google alerts to tell us with specific keywords to give us the news or an information of the most up-to-date things that are happening, the current events related to the issues that our people care about. So for example, in housing, we search things like single family zoning and every day we get an alert. So if there were any articles about single family zoning in the US, we'd get our Google alert in the morning. When we created our emails and our content, we were able to take what we thought was really relevant and share through. And maybe make a donation ask, maybe make a volunteer ask, right? So those are the things that you should consider when you're creating your newsletter, is that you're not just having one type of content, that your newsletter isn't just about just phone banks, that it's not just about, walking for this candidate, but instead that maybe you're talking about women's rights, maybe you're talking about farm worker issues, maybe you're talking about, you are part of your group, your audience, and you know what they care about. And if you don't, use emails to find out, right, what's important, what gets them going, and getting more information. And then you have your evergreen content, right, which is stuff that you are always talking about. So depending on your organization, it's something that's relevant, right? The everyday stuff, the bread and butter, it's always good to have that in there as well. And by the way, if any of y'all ever need help figuring out any of these things, like reach out and I'd be happy to sit with you and show you how you can do it. All right, next slide, please. This one's on copywriting. So one of the things that we have a tendency to do is that we want to tell everyone everything in our email. And that's not good. A lot of times we want to tell everyone everything in the way that we speak or the way that we talk about it. And these things aren't good because we're not just talking to ourselves. We're talking to different groups of people that have different levels of education, different levels of knowledge, different levels of engagement. So it's really, really good to keep it simple, keeping it clear, right? So it's always good to make sure that anyone that's new, a new member that you have, a new volunteer, that you use words that are more descriptive of what you're talking about than maybe using some of the technical terms. Like using jargon, for example. A lot of times we use jargon. I don't know, I'll give you an example. When we talk about voter ID, or when we say GOTV, right? These are things that we know and that we're used to, but someone who's new and just started volunteering, they're not gonna know what GOTV is. They're not gonna know what voter IDing is or persuasion. They don't know these things, right? So it's always good to make sure that we're explaining these things, even if they sound redundant, because that way our language is most inclusive. Another thing is that we generate FOMO. Yes, thanks for asking, Karen. And that is fear of missing out. Fear of missing out. See, I use jargon. Perfect example, right? FOMO, fear of missing out. One of the ways that I love doing that is by putting pictures of something awesome that we did in an email, right? Like sharing like a group gathering, or like if it's voter registration, like everyone getting together and meeting an elected official, right? Or even saying like, hey, we got X number, of folks registered, or we made X number of calls together. Those are different ways in which you can generate FOMO. And you're doing this by emphasizing those results and that impact and creating that sense of community, especially with us, right? With fellow progressives, right? Like we share a lot of things in common. I bet we can talk for hours about politics. We can talk for hours of how we can win. We can talk for hours of how the Dems are effing up, right? We can, right? And we can generate that FOMO. Using a conversational tone is really important. So writing like you speak more so than writing technically, that's very important. And including calls to action. I'll go into more detail later, but spreading out your calls to action throughout the bodies of your email is actually very, very, very helpful. And by calls to action, I mean like if you're talking about, phone bank, is that you have multiple ways in which where people can click, right, to register for that phone bank, as an example. And breaking up the content, the content, like having these huge paragraphs, not good. It's very difficult to follow. People get bored, but when you break it into chunks, that's always really helpful. All right, and then going into the next slide. Here we have some graphics. So graphics are important because a lot of times they give all the information that some people need to take the action, right? Whether it's a phone bank, a speaker series, right? Sometimes they don't need to read the email. And it's really important that whenever possible, if you have the resources to create graphics that are relevant to your brand, that people can easily identify, especially if you're sending them to a Mobilize, for example, that the email and the Mobilize match, or a website, so that all these things look similarly, then people can follow and always know to recognize what it is, like who it is, right? That's sharing some content. And something that's key is making that image in your emails, if you're able to put them, with the URL that you want them sent to. For example, in the Keep It Blue phone bank image, you definitely want to make it clickable. So when someone opens an email, that they can tap or click on that image, and it takes them to the Mobilize to register, as an example. And same for the speakers, right? That it takes them to the Zoom link where they can register and get their Zoom link via email. All right, next slide. So one of the things that I'm always going to emphasize audience, and that like also knowing when your audience is available is really important when it comes to scheduling. For example, if your audience tend to work 9 to 5, you don't want to send an email at 9 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night. You don't want to send an email on the weekends, right? You want to send it in the morning, anywhere between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. before they get their day started. You want to send it during lunchtime, or you want to send it immediately after work, right? So like 4:30, 5 o'clock, so that you're right in front of all the content they're getting. Imagine when you send an email, if you think about your inbox, who do you think you compete with? You're competing with Macy's, you're competing with Google, you're competing with Apple, you're competing with Facebook, you're competing with, Expedia and Travelocity and any other subscription that you may have that is also dumping emails on people all the time. So you want to make sure that you understand your audience and know exactly when you should be sending that. And again, the way you do that is that you start testing, right? Maybe if you have 100 people on your list, maybe you send 50 emails in the morning, and then you try the next 50 in the afternoon, as an example, and see which one gets more engagement. So there are ways for you to test. Again, email every time, it should be a test so that you can learn these things. Understanding the external context could mean something is in news that you should respond to. So for example, if the only gun safety bill to pass in the last 30 years passes, bet your ass you should be writing an email and say, hey, this is how it happened. Please join the movement, right? Or Roe versus Wade was killed. Now we need to get people to say, hey, this just happened, but there's something you can do about it. So having those timely moments are also really important. So paying attention to the external context is one of those things that you want to use to bring people in the movement. And a lot of times people think like, oh, that's bad, I'm taking an advantage. Not so much, because you're trying to get folks to do something good, right? In the midst of something possibly negative, or even with good news, you may want to leverage that to bring more people into your work. But it's also important that you pay attention to the current events, because some content may seem insensitive or inappropriate, or you don't want to email about something funny on the day that something very serious happened, right? So you want to pay attention to what's happening, and that it makes sense and it's appropriate. And this is and also the platforms is like if you're using multimedia messaging, so if you're doing email and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, that all your things are aligned, right, with your messaging, your imagery, and that sort of thing. So the idea here is just that you're consistent. All right, so I'm going to take a break here. Next slide, and we're going to open it up for questions. So if anyone has any questions, if they're in the chat, if someone will read them, if Susan, if you read them.
Sure. So Rudy, one thing you did mention to me is that at some point you were going to ask about what the different platforms we use.
That's next. That's next.
Okay, cool. Okay,
Right.
so yeah, so one question was, Colleen asked, in that section you were talking about the connection with the different groups. It was back about 5 slides. She didn't quite understand that connection there, the point you were making there. So that was, if Cecilia, if you back up like maybe 5 slides, it was, I think it was
Rudy, you were saying that white people were answering the emails from NIMBY and white people were showing up. And then by, I believe, using batching, you were getting responses from different audiences, but I never understood.
Oh, I see your point. Okay. So actually what I was saying about that is that the organization had mostly white members and volunteers, right? And when I analyzed the emails, a lot of the content was positioned around issues that affect mostly white renters, right? The YIMBYs, right? It didn't talk about the issues that affected, for example, something that affects a lot of mostly white renters, not all, only, but mostly white renters, is the lack of middle housing, right? For example, there aren't 3-bedroom apartments in the Bay Area. There aren't that many. That mostly affects the white middle class techies. So that's something that they were always talking about. We need middle housing. We need middle housing. They called it middle housing, right? But what they didn't talk about was low income housing, right? Or subsidized affordable housing, which that affected a lot of low income people and a lot of people of color, right? So what people of color would say about YIMBY Action was that they thought that YIMBYs were for white people because they only talked about white people problems and they only worked to address white people problems. But that wasn't true. There was a lot of work happening in the organization around affordable housing and around low income housing, except that no one talked about it. So we started talking about it. And then it changed the perception that people had that this was an organization of mostly white folks. So so when we talk about the content being relevant, like, are we only talking about, as an example, I mean, are we only talking about a specific problem for a specific group of people and we're leaving other people out in the process, right? So how can we think about including others by talking about issues differently? In the case of YIMBY Action, for example, they were talking about the housing issue, but they were talking about the housing issue in one way that affected only one group. They weren't really talking about how it affected lower income and marginalized folks, which tended to be a lot of people of color or people with disabilities.
Yeah, thank you. So I actually, I've been struggling with scheduling actually, because since the pandemic, it seems like it's like there's no hours anymore. There's no like structure. So I do, I think all of us like do tests and try to figure out, which links worked. Many of us use Action Network, I'm sure. And then I think Susan, what do you use?
Susan, you're getting ahead of me.
Yeah. Okay. The bottom line is scheduling. That's
yeah, we can talk about that.
Testing. Yeah. So that's something I haven't really nailed down. And also the notion of writing like you speak. This is another thing because like, I don't really speak about take action, go to a phone bank, it's just kind of a hard to phrase it in a way that's not like kind of dead and just not very active. It's more passive. It's like, oh yeah, go do that. It's just I'm struggling with how to make that different.
Yeah, there's really, it's like, what I think you can differentiate the call to action, right? Like join now or donate. I would separate that from the body of the email. I'm referring more to the body of the email, that you're speaking in ways that how you would talk about an issue with your neighbor, not how you think it should sound because you're sending an email to 1,000 people and you should be all proper and perfect. It's more about being natural and conversational, so it appeals to the most amount of people, because being very technical and I'm going to use the term proper or trying to be may just not appeal to everyone. And it may sound cold, or it may sound emotionless, right? And really now a lot of writing has transitioned into tapping into folks' emotions and connecting them through emotion. So it's taking those things into consideration when you write. I mean, when you're explaining a bill, there's only so much of speaking conversationally that you can go into writing a bill, right? That's something very technical. But when you're talking about, women's reproductive rights and the impact that could have, that could be very emotional, very different than trying to explain a bill as an example.
Yeah, gotcha. Because the content pillars that we deal with are so emotional, and that's where I find I can be more natural. But I think other people have asked about the scheduling. So you say you're going to get to that. So that's the only other, I don't see any hands raised. So we can talk about this experimenting and getting feedback in a second, it sounds like, right, Rudy?
Yeah, and the last comment is actually speaking to Barb, is exactly what I'm asking y'all to do, is that instead of dumping things on people, like, here are all the things, here's one or two things, right? And I'll get into that shortly. And let people digest it one at a time versus feeling there's a dump, feeling overwhelmed, I don't have time, I'm too busy, and then they don't do anything, right? So, but if there aren't any.
Rudy, around that though, how do you balance not bombarding people with too many one-issue ones?
Yeah.
Oh, no. So that's about not sending too many emails. You could possibly send too many emails, right? Sending more than 2 emails a week, you should really ask yourself, like, what are we doing? If you're sending more than 1 email a day, you got a problem. A lot of people just stop reading. If you're sending more than 1 email a day, you really need to ask yourself, like, am I prioritizing things, and am I really sharing what's really important, or am I sharing everything? A lot of times we think everything is important, but everything is not important to everything. And this is why segmenting and having specific audiences is best, right? You might have the email dump for your super volunteers, but you have the one action item for people who are less engaged and less involved, right? To try to get them, encourage them to take that action that you really want people to make. Like, if there's a specific petition that is like the number one priority for you, that's the thing. That's the one thing you share to everyone. But if it's something that is really for the engaged folks, then you should be segmenting, right? So that there's mutual exclusivity with audiences. Not everyone is getting all the emails.
Yeah.
I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. So it's been brought up a few times about keeping it simple, and that definitely about writing.
Keep it simple, stupid.
And also, you never want to be told by someone, which I was told by a younger person, TLDR.
Yes.
It's
TLDR.
Too long, didn't
read. Yes. So you can actually include that in your emails, right? That is something that it is a common practice now at work in the tech space. Every presentation has a TLDR slide. Any document report has a TLDR section, which is, if I have 3 minutes to read or 2 minutes to read, can I capture the key messages in that very little time that I have? So if you have to write a long email, don't be afraid to just write TLDR and write 3 sentences, and that's it. Like
a summary.
Our country's on fire. We need to save democracy. Here's how. Boom. That's your TLDR. I mean, that's the TLDR of the state of our union right now. But
well put.
Yeah.
Susan has her hand raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put something in chat. It didn't get noticed. I raised my hand, and then I had to put my hand up to add something. And
sorry, I can't see anyone, and I can't see the chat. So
that's okay. Thank you, because you finally got to what I put in chat and what I've been trying to bring up. We all are on too many mailing lists, and we get too many emails, and each person thinks that theirs is the only one you're getting. And I glaze over at most of them and do not read through them, as was just mentioned. So, and if I'm sending to a list that I want to get to a phone bank, I've started making it tighter and tighter and fewer things. They know what we want. They know why we're doing this, and just put a few lines in there and the link to sign up. I find the easier I make it, the more likely someone might be to sign up. I may be wrong. It's not working great yet, but I think, if you're getting to the right people, we just want to save time. Tell me what you want. Tell me where the sign up is, and let me do it. Is pretty much the way I approach it. And I don't send too many emails. Again, you burn out your audience. If the large list I have, I may only send 2 once a month and give them several options in there. If it's phone banks, give them the Mobilize link and they can choose from there.
Yeah.
And then I've experimented with the time. You mentioned that, the time to send them. I sometimes send them where people will get them on Saturday morning. Because if the phone banks are on Saturday morning, they may be looking at their emails when they're not at work and it's personal. Or I will send them where sometimes I receive them at 6 o'clock in the morning on a weekday morning, and I'm checking my emails before going to work. And I'm finding that might be a time to do it, or after work. I'm open to suggestions there.
Well, actually, we do have that something Rudy's going to get to, and I've asked it, and Colleen asked it too. Is how do you experiment with different times of day? How do you get specific feedback about the emails sent, like Susan described, on a Saturday morning, or not? So, and then Rudy, do you want to keep going a little
Yeah,
bit? And then
yeah.
we'll come back
Continue. Let's
and
continue.
see if
just for
some
the
of
sake
these other
time.
questions link in.
If they get answered. If not, we'll discuss them. All right, let's go to the next slide. Now we're going to go specific dive deeper into the email, into specifics. All right, let's talk about some of the best practices. So I got a couple questions for y'all, and if someone, or Susan or Cecilia, if y'all will take count of how many hands go up, because I can't see everyone. So all right, so this question is about, we want you to answer in the chat. In the chat, tell me what email system or CRM system you're using. Some examples are like Nation Builder, Action Network, MailChimp, Gmail for Gmail, Mail Meteor, anything like that. I would love to hear what you're using. And if you don't use one, right? I don't use one in the chat. See a lot of Action Networks, Nation Builder, Action Network. All right. Oh, I see. Someone sends them from their personal Gmail. Okay. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about in a bit applies to most of you, or even all of you, because you'll have some of those capabilities of those things that I'm going to talk about. All right. Now, have any of you, show of hands or write it in the chat, have you ever conducted an A/B test? And if you don't know what that is, that's okay. Just write in the chat, I don't know what that is.
Well, one person knew what it was, but also I think
okay.
Most of us don't.
Okay.
Or we haven't done it.
All right. So awesome. So it seems like most of us here don't know what an A/B test is. A/B stands for alpha and beta, A/B test. So does anyone want to share, or want to take that has used it, want to tell us what that is, explain it, or try to explain it?
It looks like Bruce might
All right,
know.
Bruce, go for it. I know Bruce knows.
Yeah, hi, do you hear me?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, so A/B testing is, I'll explain it and then I'll tell you my concern. A/B testing is you can send one variant of an email to a random group of people and another variant of the same email to a different group of people. So essentially, if you have a list of 1,000 people, you can write 2 different messages and send half of them to randomly selected 500 people and the other half to the other 500 people, and compare the differences. Or you could send the same message at 2 different times, or you could send same message with different subject lines. So it's a way to compare perhaps open rates, or how many clicks you get, or who knows what, based on the email content, or when it was sent, or what the subject line was. So is that reasonably clear?
Yeah, Bruce, I think that that's really good. And I do want to add to that. When you do an A/B test, you typically send to a smaller sample of your overall list so that you send the winning message, the winning email to the majority of your list. So for example, if you have a list of, I don't know, 10,000, you take 10% and you divide the 10% in half. So you take 500 for email A and 500 for email B. Now, when you do an A/B test, you only change one variable and you test for one metric. For example, subject line, right? Subject line is one of those really important things that people see before they open your email. So if you're going to test your subject line, you should only test your subject line. If you're going to test another variable, you should, like your call to action, right? Like the button, right? If one says join now and the other one says register, you want to test which one works better, you can do that. And yes, believe it or not, many times one word makes a big difference. And those are some of the things that I want to talk about. So for all of you that have Action Network, Contact, Constant Contact, Nation Builder, you all have the ability to do A/B tests. Where you can randomly select people in a specific audience, and then select the winning email to be sent to everyone else, right? So that it does give you the option to do that. We're not going to go into any technical details now. I'm very comfortable at another time showing you how to do all these things in Action Network. I used Action Network for over a year and a half. And this is how I feel like I was perfecting all my emails, is being able to do these things. So I just wanted to gauge like where everyone was at. So that's very helpful. The majority of you are using very well-known, strong CRM tools. CRM stands for customer relationship management tools, which is, whether it's email, sometimes text messages, right? There's and even phone calls, and Action Network has the ability to do all those. Now I sound like I'm selling Action Network, but I'm not. I'm just explaining that it has. Yeah, Bruce, go ahead and share your comment.
So I'm going to rain on the parade just a little bit. Most of us, including Swing Left Peninsula, and we have about 4,000 people we send emails to, we don't have a big enough list to have statistical significance in the results. And so it's pretty easy to get misled. If you send an email to 500 people and you have two different subject lines and, one of them gets opened by, 1% more than the other, it's probably not statistically significant. So just be cautious.
I would disagree with that, Bruce. If you have a list of 4,000, if you take 500, 1,000 of those, and if there is, it doesn't mean, okay, every time you do an A/B test doesn't mean you're going to have statistical a differse, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to do that, but it is possible. So just to clarify, it is possible.
I've run the numbers, you go online and I've typed in all the parameters into statistical significance calculators. And most of the time there is no real difference. I think once I found something that was statistically significant. So it's
right. So that
don't
means
get
that
misled, I guess, is my.
Well, luckily we're not profit we're not about profit.
Right. And you're also not trying to be scientific. You're just trying to put out what's best out there. So even if it's, for example, if you send out an email for 4,000 people, right, and you have one email that gets 25% opens and the other one gets 28% opens, right, you see the 28 had a small difference, right, where a number of people preferred that, and you're increasing the number of people who are actually opening the email, which also increases the likeliness, hopefully, for them to take the action. You can also be testing for how many clicks, right? So if you see one that has even a 1 or 2% difference, by confidence level, it wouldn't be considered statistically significant. However, you're going to get more people from one email over the other to take the action. So it's not about being scientific either, but I see what you're saying. But
let's not get too deep into
But just give me a moment. So two things. One is I've never seen a 3% difference, in the A/B testing I've done. The second is I've run the same test twice, and it's like, whoa, this one did whatever, a 0.5% better than the other one. Then I run that same test again, with a randomly somewhat different group of people, none of whom overlapped, and the other one does 0.5% better. That's the thing about statistical significance, is you can get variation that looks great, but turns out it's not real. So really, it's, for people who want to do it, it's good, I think, but don't get too wrapped up in it.
Agreed.
Is my
Agreed.
don't feel like, whoa, I got to
Yeah.
do this.
It may depend on
it
what
is-
you're testing. It may depend on what you're testing.
Exactly.
Let's look
So-
at the bigger
so
picture now.
I'm gonna pause everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna pause everyone right now, and I'm gonna say the following. In my experience, it works, and I'm gonna give you example. I'm gonna give you a clear example of it over a subject line and how it led to different results. It is something that you can easily do, especially if you have the tools, where you don't have to spend that much more time. Literally, you draft 2 different subject lines, for example, and you can check which one, whether one is more emotional based or one is more fact based. You're able to see if one does better over the other one, and you simply just goes to the one that did better, whether it's statistical or not. It doesn't matter. It still goes to the one that did better. And sometimes you'll get a statistical significant difference, and sometimes you won't. So I see your point. There's nothing really to get wrapped into, but if you want to find out things like times, you want to find out a specific subject line, you want to find out about a specific call to action, you just add a couple more steps and you're able to test for those things without much complexity, because y'all already have those systems in place to do it. So there's not much more work, is what I'm saying, for you to do it, to just send the one that performed, even if it's just slightly better. But I do appreciate your comment. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that we should talk about is some of the email basics, right? And these email basics are the things that people see up front. One of them is who's sending it. Yes, that matters. I tested this and got a statistical significant difference. That if I send it in the name of YIMBY Action, or if I send it under my name, people were opening the emails more under YIMBY Action. Why? Because they probably recognize the brand better, right? We try to figure out if it came from a person. And we did this even with our executive director, that everyone knows. The emails that came from the organization just happened to do better. So when you're sending emails, something to consider. Are you sending it under the name of the organization, or are you sending it under your personal name? You know what? You can test it and see what happens, right? And maybe it's the same, maybe it's not. The subject line, right? You got a couple words, and there are different ways in which you can frame things from different points of views, whether it's emotional or more fact-based or technical, right? And figure out what works best for the audience in which you're sending. Then there's something else called the preview text. Who here uses preview text in their Action Network?
Yeah,
Are there other yeses? I can't see people.
yeah, I do, but I.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. And that's, sorry, I have a motorcycle, really loud one right behind next to me. So
Wait, you're on a motorcycle?
no, I'm not. Someone's riding.
Scared.
I'm outside enjoying the sun in the park. So,
Okay, that scared me.
but someone's doing a total circle around me in a motorcycle. So the preview text is really important. Why? A lot of times when we use our cell phones and get alerts on our cell phones for emails, we get about, I think it's about 50 to 75 characters, maybe a little bit more.
Mhm.
And if you don't include that, it just starts off with the first sentence of your email. Or if you have an image, it'll just say image, right?
Mhm.
So you're wasting real estate that you have to attract attention on your email, especially specifically with someone on their phone. So it's something that if you're not using now, you should start using. So the things that you need to recognize as best practices is like, who's sending it? Are you sending it under your personal name, or are you sending it under the organization's name? Did you select the right audience? Again, are you sending it to everyone, or are you sending to the people who really care about what you're writing about? And attention grabbing subject line, Bruce mentioned, he's done that. Some A/B testing, you can do that. It's fairly simple if you already have the tools, and incorporate that into something that you do. So when you write out your email, start writing your email in a Google Doc and write, 2 subject lines that you think, and share with your peers, right? And say, what do you think about these 2? Do they sound attention grabbing? Yes or no? And if most people, they lean towards one, then you probably got a winner. But you can test that. Including the preview text that only previews the email. You don't give your message. So if you're going to share some big news, don't put your big news in the subject line. Don't put your big news in the preview text. And that you're sending it at the right times that work for your audience, right? So, some folks say they open their emails at 6 a.m. I would never open an email at 6 a.m. because I'm still sleeping at 6 a.m. But by the time I get up, by 8 o'clock, well, when Avery gets me up around 7:30, I've already gotten a bunch of emails by then. So maybe it's like 8 o'clock is the best time for most of your audience. So it really depends what works best for your audience. All right, so next slide. On email targeting. Sorry, I
It's
just realized,
animated, animation.
sorry, I just realized that those were animated and they weren't supposed to be. I thought I apologize.
Wait, while you're doing that animation though, it goes back to the subject, the sender. So we all become really reliant on Mobilize. And I find that people get so many reminders from Mobilize and they're inundated with them that it seems like it works better when I remind them under my name. And
Yep.
Also, it's just weird. That's one organization that I don't think is what it's best to use the organization.
Yeah, I think what's happening there with Mobilize is people are just getting fatigued by it, and also maybe even a little PTSD from 2020, from getting all the Mobilize emails and all the and they're connecting it to that election and all that work they did. It's funny because I haven't unsubscribed from Mobilize because I need it.
That's right.
Because I get way too many emails from them.
Yeah.
All right, and then so going into email targeting, so not every email is for everybody, and I've said this many times. So if you go ahead and click, because I guess it's also animated, and I guess I didn't remove it. So next, before sending answer the following question: now, who is this email relevant for? The next, ask yourself: is it for your members or your closest people, or is it for all your subscribers? So is it people who just want to stay in the know, or is it people that are really active? Which goes to the next one, right? Which is, your membership, or the ones that are super active. Like I like to call them the super volunteers, right? You might want to start tagging people as your super volunteers to send things that are very specific to them.
Mhm.
For example, if you have a last minute event in person you want people to show up to, you want to send it to very specific people. And then next, selecting by level of engagement. So for example, if they opened your emails within the last 90 days, remember, so these are all things you can do in Action Network, by the way, that I know for sure because I've worked with that closely. So if you go ahead and click, so open within the last 90 days. Next, whether you took, 3 actions in the last year as an example, right? Or next, you can make exclusions, right? And exclude people who never open and never click, right? You can start cleaning up your list. You can start bothering them, and maybe save it for when you have a really, really important ask that you send to those people that haven't been opening or clicking in a long time. All right, so here's an example of an A/B test. If we go to the next slide, where we saw a big difference. So I had a little dispute with my boss when I worked at YIMBY Law, right? Because I worked for both. We had just won a case, and I drafted a subject line, and she's like, "Nope, I don't think that works. I think we should say group housing." And I said, "Who cares about group housing? This case was about senior housing, right?"
Mhm.
And she's like, "No, but it was group housing." I said, "Well, okay, I'll challenge you. Let's do an A/B test now. We have a list of 30,000, so we have a very, very big list, right?" So what I was arguing was that using the word senior housing had created more of an emotional tie. So saying senior housing, the subject line I wanted was Superior Court judge rules senior housing is housing. And the other ones were the ones my boss thought. And as you can see, when we actually did an ABCD test. We tested 4 different subject lines because we have a very big list. So we're capable of doing that. We had almost 4 percentage point difference between the lowest performing one and the highest performing one. But something also very interesting happened, that we got higher click rates with the folks that opened The email, when I said senior housing is housing. So one of the hypotheses that we have on this is that people can easily connect with the idea that seniors need housing. Because when you say things like group housing, then you can think about like, I don't know, kids in a dorm or whatever, right? Then it just gets diluted. But the idea of older folks not being able to get housing, I think that touches everyone, right? And we saw the difference. It was the exact same email, the same body. The only thing we changed was the subject line. That's it. And it even affected the click rate. So we did see a big one. Do we have age available on your email file? We have age available in the surveys, and the average ages we have are in the 30s in that list. Most people are in the 30s.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to see. So this was, you were blasting. So if I assume you have 30,000, did you split it 7,500 each?
No, we did. I think we did 10. I think we did 1,000 for each.
Oh, okay.
If I
That was
remember
just to
correctly.
test it. Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
to test it, and then we sent the winning email to the rest of the list. Yeah, so it was a randomized test of 1,000. 1,000 people got, each subject line, and then we sent the winning email. We sent the winning subject line.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So, it does matter. Not always, right? Just to be clear, it doesn't always give you results like this, but sometimes you get important results. All right, so the next one,
That's a great example of previewing.
yeah, so here's an example of a preview, right? And what it looks like. So when I talk about preview, that's like a screenshot of someone's phone. You see the preview text there, it's one line, but it doesn't say what the news is, right? So this was around the recall for Governor Newsom. YIMBY Action had endorsed Governor Newsom in the recall, and they organized against the recall. And you see there, it created that FOMO, like, I want to know more. I want to find out what is the news that everyone's talking about, right? And it's in there.
Mm-hmm.
So things that y'all can think about. And you can see the results of that email, almost a 60% open rate, which is really, really high. Our average was about 33%, which in of itself is already high, but reaching a 56% open rate to a list of 30,000 is very high. All right, next. All right, so going into the call to action, because I know that this is something that we all care about, is how we tell people to do things, right? How we ask them to do things. So when I say 1, 2, 3 is pushing it, having more than 2 things, more than 2 asks in an email, and I think y'all have already recognized this, is it is too much. You can't ask people to do a bunch of things in an email and expect them to actually do all those things. It's very rare. It happens, but it's very rare. So some of those best practices are, so the first one is including a graphic if possible that is clear about what the email is about. So that's something that's really important, and I'll show you an example later. Limit the CTAs, right? 1 to 2, 3 is pushing it. 3 is pushing it. So limiting that. That you don't repeat the same calls to action. So if you're if you're asking someone to participate in 2 different events, don't have that same one back to back, like register now, right? Get creative, change it up a little bit. And then the last one is spread the calls to action throughout the body, right? So if you're asking someone to sign a petition, that you're talking about, when you mention the petition, that petition, the name of the petition in the body is actually a link to the petition, right? And at the bottom it says sign the petition. So it goes through, so that you're going throughout through the email that you're spreading the calls to action. So it gives multiple opportunities for people with different levels of engagement to actually follow through the call to action. Everything from the graphic to in the body to the button at the bottom of the email. All right, and I'm gonna make this quick because I have a 6 p.m. so I gotta run as well. So yeah, so if you see there, I put an example of how to use how to mention calls to action, how to ask people things. Like there's an example of like photos of my trip are here, here, and here. Never tell people, click here, see this document here. Actually say what the document is and make the name of the document, like here are photos of my trip at the beach, on a boat, going fishing, right? That those things become your link. So it's very clear what it is that people are clicking on. All right, and the last slide is an example of an email that did really well. And it's very simple. You see at the very top, there's the image with a very clear statement, right, that a lot of people can agree on. And I love this image because to me, it's very powerful. And a lot of people also said the same thing, that this picture just really called to them. And that picture, that image was also the URL, right? It would send you to the actual letter writing campaign for, again, also an Action Network, for your members of Congress. Then it has the headline, make sure Congress votes for housing reform, right? Like that is what you're asking them to do in the headline. You have the body, which is very short. And you see that within the body, there is a call to action. Send a letter to your congressional reps. It's in there, right? Send a letter is also a link. And at the bottom, tell your reps to vote for housing. We don't repeat the same call to action twice. So we've spread the message multiple times. We've given people 3 opportunities to click that end up in the same place. And then we said it in different ways because it works for different people. Some people are more graphical, some people read all the way to the bottom. So this way you're capturing all folks. And that's it. I mean, I could talk about email for hours. I can use specifics and Action Network, and I'd love to chat with y'all about it. But any like really pressing questions that y'all have before we go, because I know it's 6 o'clock and people are ready to go.
Yeah, how do you make that button on Action Network? The call your rep or whatever, send an email.
So first you create the call campaign, and then it generates the link, and then it actually gives you the option to send an email when you create the call campaign or letter writing campaign to do it from there. So if you have already templates set up, you can simply take the link and put it into your button, right?
Oh, gotcha. It's just putting a link in a button. Yeah, okay. Okay, Karen, we have 2 questions and I think we have literally 2 minutes. So Karen Mackey.
This is just a very quick comment. I try to make it very simple and easy for people to do what I want. So if I want them to call their senator, I provide the phone number as an example.
Yeah. Yep, that's great, simple tactic.
Yeah, in Action Network, what it actually does is that it actually connects you to your senator or your congressional rep, right? So if you live in a place where it has multiple districts, it routes the people to the right place. So it'll send them to a page where they put their address, and then it'll tell them who it is, and it'll make the call for them, or it'll automatically send the email for them. So Action Network does automate a lot.
And Chris has a question.
Yeah, real quick. Do we know whether scary emails or inspirational emails are better? Sorry if this has been covered already.
I would say never do one of either all the time. I'd say mix it up. Because if you're always doomsday, then people just think like, oh my gosh, I'm just gonna read some doomsday message. And if you're always like, everything's great and happy, I think you should always mix it up. Celebrate your wins are always important. This is why the content pillars are key, because celebrating wins is one of those content pillars. Like if there's a bill that passed that is like very much in line with your values, that's celebrating a win, right? If someone that you worked hard for got elected or won a primary, that's celebrating a win. Those are positive messages. But turning turning over Roe versus Wade, that's like a doomsday message for sure, right? No doubt about it. So I think it's mixing it up and that's why the content pillars are important, so that it's part of your strategy to mix it up and not always have just one of the same.
Oh yeah, I love Bruce put in chat that a message from Anat Shankar Osorio, who says progressives respond better to positive messages. That's classic. Okay, so I don't think we have any other questions and we don't have any time. So Rudy, thank you so much. This is a great, I wish we had 3 hours, but not on Zoom. But
Right.
That said, you said if people wanted to follow up with you, like what would be the best way to do that?
To email me. I think most of you have my email, but if not, it's espinoza.rudy@gmail.com.
Excellent. Okay. Espinoza.rudy@gmail.com. I'll put it in chat, but I'm sure everyone knows that. So thank you very much for taking time to do this with us.
Thank you guys. You have a good night. Bye-bye.